It is a pleasure to be here. I hope I can give you some useful information. That's my coffee cup. Oh. Is that your wallet? I hope everyone in the room understands the irony of this picture. Yeah. Hot pie on Kentucky 31 called Fescue. Yeah, I'd say it's hot. My personal philosophy, I work for a seed industry. For the seed industry, I work for one of the largest seed companies in the seed industry. My feeling, my philosophy is it starts with management. If we don't get that right, we're not doing you any favors. And we're in it for the long haul. Fourth generation, Baron Brooks, still on the board of directors of the company. Started in 1904. We're not interested just in making a sale, we're interested in something bigger. So what we have here with our distribution, we have King's Agri-Seeds downstairs in the vendors area, and they're one of our largest distributors. We develop, we license, we produce the seed, we wholesale market it through distribution. King's is one of our partners, as are our customers, producers. But we have a special offer just for the Appalachian Grazing Conference. And if you go down and you visit them, you will be able to get this golden orb of pasture management. And the way this deal works, I'll turn this off in just a little bit. I want it to be really annoying. Okay, that's enough? All right. Well, the idea with that, I heard this at a presentation in Missouri, is you'll be given your golden orb, and you pick your biggest pasture, and you walk across that pasture holding it out at arm's length until you get to the furthest fence post at the far side. Then you set this golden orb with pasture management on the post, and then you turn around and you walk back to the gate a different way. The next day you come back in a different way, get to that golden orb where it's still on there's a special bracket, because I mentioned that you have to buy that. We'll give you the orb, but you have to buy the bracket. And then you turn it exactly a quarter rotation. It's got to be clockwise. Okay, that's very important. Then you turn around and you come back a different way. Now, of course, nothing actually happens because of the golden orb, but what it does is it makes you walk your pastures twice a day. Right? That's the key. The footprints of the farmer, right?
You gotta look down.
Well, damn, you need to read the directions, I guess. So Liebeg's barrel, familiar with this? Anybody who took soil fertility, and if it was a painful experience, I'm sorry. But this idea that there's always going to be something limiting in whatever natural system you're talking about, and they use the analogy of a wooden barrel made with different slats, different lengths, and something, different lengths, one of them is always going to set the volume. It's going to set the yield. It's going to set the forage distribution. Whatever it is, the parameter we're looking at, we can increase that. So now phosphorus was limiting, you see that, but now we've added phosphorus, now nitrogen is limiting. And as you continue to adjust, something else becomes limiting. I think this is a really valuable concept for health. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But again, management is so critical. And if we don't get that right, really we need to start there. Just because there's a fence around it, don't make it a pasture. Right? I think, faced as an agronomist, that this pasture is a fine example of equine toxicity. Oh, come on.
I wish it was toxic.
And I lived
right next door.
The other explanation is that this fence is so tight it keeps the grass out. So we have to focus on the management, and one of those concepts is that we're grass farmers first. And then we make decisions. Now, of course, I'm an agronomist, so of course but I really think we need to get outside of the cattlemen, sheepmen, dairies, whatever that is, and realize that what supports our industry is the forage base. And then lots of other things will flow as a result of that. I've been involved with a number of organizations and they come up with great, long, lofty sounding mission statements. This is the best one I've been a part of. And we do have a turf grass section of our industry, of our business, so I like the order here. I think that's the right priority. Increase animal productivity to help feed the world and enhance the enjoyment of green space. Right? Without agriculture, there's no need for amenity. Right? Without primary industry, there's not the wealth to then support the rest of society. Talk about that a little later. We have a tremendous amount of horsepower behind us as a company in our breeders and research people. If you're familiar with what's happened to the USDA ARS plant breeding effort, this is about 7 times what's left in the cool season grass breeding. This is home. This is the Willamette Valley. That's Mary's Peak. It's the highest point in the coastal range. From here to the Pacific Ocean, it'll take you about an hour. That's 4,000 feet at the very top. Down here at the valley floor, we're 200, 300 foot. There's been a little change in agriculture over the years, hasn't there? Here's your prize-winning fat steer. I don't know how old that youngin' is, but that'll give you some sense of scale. This is what grain processing, because they've already cut the grain. They've already hauled it here. And we now have this OSHA-approved drive belt here. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 forms of renewable energy that I can count. There's been some changes in agriculture, but unfortunately forage agriculture in the United States has really lagged behind. And there's a number of reasons, and I'd like to get other people's ideas on this, but the genetics that has advanced animal husbandry, the nutrition that's advanced animal husbandry, in forages not so much. Anybody here ever familiar with vernal and ranger alfalfas? Okay, anybody still planting them? When were they released? Well, they were released a long time ago. Yeah, Ranger was the first public variety released, 1942. Vernal was released in 53, about 10 years later. The majority of the cool season grass seed that's sold in the United States is of comparable vintage, just on a pound basis. We've got Lynn Perennial, Potomac Orchardgrass, and Kentucky 31, all coming out prior to 1945. We've got Climax Timothy in the late 40s. We've got Gulf Annual Ryegrass in the late 50s and Fawn-Tall Fescue in the mid-60s. Now, I'll just tell you myself, I was born in 56. When an agronomist or a plant breeder evaluates new forages, what are they trying, what criteria do they use in the breeding programs? Persistence, drought tolerance, insect resistance, right? Those sorts of things. Yield is going to be in there. Winter hardiness would be a good one. But at the end of the day, we're not getting paid for grass. Now from Oregon. You may or may not be aware that you have to be careful about what you mean by grass. We used to have a marketing slogan, got grass? We don't use that too much anymore. I was sitting at the dining room table in my home doing some work, and there was a knock on the door. And I went and answered the door, and it was the county sheriff. And he was looking for a dog that had been hit on the road, or somebody had reported a dog hit, so, you know, you had one, and I told him what I knew. He had a kind of funny look on his face. I went back, closed the door, sat down, went, oh, I was wearing a hat that said "Got grass." At the end of the day, what we're interested in is the pounds of milk or the pounds of beef that we can make out of the forages that we're growing. That's what we're going to get paid for. Okay? So what were they using to evaluate these varieties? Those agronomic traits, not necessarily animal performance. They tested it, I'm not saying, but in order to test animal performance, you need a lot of seeds. You need a lot of ground, you need animals, you need people, you need a lot of money. You don't do that in a breeding program until fairly late. Remember when TTN, no, not like you actually were around when TTN came out, that's not what I meant. But TTN goes back to 1860s. Approximate analysis, it's been a long time. Why are we still using TTN? In vitro fertility was published in 1963. I'm going to make the case that all of these varieties were released before we ever had an in vitro dry matter digestibility assay. And then of course Mansus came out a little bit later. What about all this other time? How many people here how many people here are cash croppers? Anybody? Okay. If you know anybody that grows corn or corn silage hybrids, right? How much time do they spend picking the next year's hybrid? Right? And when do they book those sales? And in forages, I'm afraid too many times people, it's a nice day today, let me go down to the feed store and see what they got. That's their degree of planning. We need to get a little bit more, I would suggest, conscious about our planning. If you know anything about University of Wisconsin and grass, you know this must have been really painful because they've been like alfalfa and corn silage and grass only, lowers the feed value of alfalfa. That's been their philosophy for too long. But we have greater differences now amongst these varieties than exist between corn hybrids and soybean varieties. This is the data that backs up that statement. This difference of 6 tons per acre for perennial ryegrass probably represents the difference between winter kill and survival of top yielding varieties. Remember Lynn perennial ryegrass? That was developed in New Zealand. So the first perennial ryegrasses that were coming into the United States for forage use weren't really well adapted. Well, you can go to Europe, where perennial ryegrass is from, and you can find winter hardy continental types and bring them over, which we've done. Again, management is critical. Basic agronomy is critical. Right? None of this gets past any, whatever we're going to talk about after this. You've got to have good seedbed preparation, or you've got to have good sod disturbance if you're going to go no-till, or something like that. There's no getting past that. But this is just one example of how important this is. Okay, so somebody buys our beneficial endophyte tall fescue called Var Optima plus E34. They plant, close to 100 acres of it, so it's a sizable investment. They're not really pleased with the stand that they got. Looking at that, I can understand why. Of course, what's the problem? I'm hearing good answers, but I'm also hearing the answer, which is it's always the seed. Right? Yeah, because anyone want to guess what the tire pattern was? Yeah. I mean, they did the seedbed prep, and then they came across this with one of those air seeders and then a chain behind it. And wherever the cleats hit was just that little bit more compaction that they needed to get that good seed-soil contact to let. So it wasn't the seeds problem. Basic agronomy, there's no getting past it. And now, of course, we have stand-killing hay harvesting equipment. Right? And so it's fine to cut alfalfa close, it's not fine to cut grass close. Right? Do I have to spend a lot of time on this? Where are the carbohydrate reserves in an alfalfa plant stored? In the root of an alfalfa. I meant to say alfalfa. Okay, in the root is where, so you can scalp that as long as you don't damage the crown of the alfalfa plant, and then those new buds will come from the root, the reserves that are stored in the root. Where are the carbohydrate reserves stored in a perennial cool season grass? In the stem base, that 3 to 4 inches, depends, different species, different. So you know, if you're running a piece of equipment like this, one of my colleagues said, and you look over your left shoulder and you see, or right, that's the right shoulder, and you see brown, you need to pick it up just a little bit. And some of these pieces of equipment, you may actually have to build some kind of shoe to get a little extra clearance. Okay? So a lot of the American hay harvesting equipment, again, is sort of alfalfa centric. So we need to be careful with that. Okay. I work for a seed company. Guilty. Right? God bless America. Free enterprise. There is nothing so expensive as cheap seed. If you, for example, I got this from New Zealand, and what they're saying is if you as a dairy farmer mess up your paddock reseeding, regrassing, your cost is not the additional seed and fuel it's going to take to go over that paddock again. The cost is what you've just done to your rotation and your animal production. Because you just push that all out at least a month before it's back to where you had hoped it would be, right? You hopefully started this process at the optimal time, so you may be out of the weather window. You may be several months out now, all because you were trying to save a few cents. Now, as an agronomist, I love the statement from Dairy NZ, the New Zealand Dairy Organization, where they said that the advancement in the New Zealand dairy industry is not due to the cattle genetics, but due to the grass genetics. Hallelujah. I hope I live long enough to see that kind of mindset shift in the United States. And in New Zealand, they're telling dairymen that if you're not regrassing your pastures on a 10-year rotation, you're losing money. You're losing money because stand performance declines over time. It's going to happen, right? You can never do an optimal job the whole time. You're going to have compaction. You're going to have various issues that cause the productivity of that stand to decline. Plus, they talk about the opportunity cost, the genetic advancement that's taking place in those grasses in a 10-year period. That's what they're doing. Okay? But their industry is supporting that kind of effort. Remember, the majority of cool season grass seed that's being sold in the United States is of varieties that were released prior to 1964. And seriously, we have no idea what those varieties are anymore, because they're just being produced. So there's all kinds of genetic shift going on. It's a whole other thing. So we can breed for a number of traits, and we've been doing it. You can see what we can produce in the way of rust tolerance or persistence or salt tolerance. Remarkable things. One thing that's exciting in the dairy industry, this may not be directly applicable to this audience, but I just want you to know about it, is in fiber digestibility. I think this is applicable, but this example is maybe outside. So, which has more energy in it? A pound of digestible starch or a pound of digestible fiber? How many people vote for the pound of digestible starch? How many people vote for the pound of digestible fiber? How many people strongly suspect a trick question? Okay. There's the same amount of energy in a pound of digestible starch as there is in a pound of digestible fiber. Okay? Bioenergetics. So the more digestible fiber you can produce and get into your cow, the less you need to supply from digestible starch. Now, of course, you're going to get more per pound from the starch than you're going to get from the forage, right? But still, this is an opportunity to reduce costs, especially in the dairy industry. And there's lots of physiological reasons that we want more highly digestible, physically effective fiber going into a rumen. Lots of really good reasons. This is just an example to show that this is a test that you do with the best strainer from your kitchen. Right? You want the new one. Okay? Go out to your barn, select up a nice manure sample, and then wash it. And then you can look at what remains undigested, pass through the animal. And you start to see starch, and you know you have an issue. Well, it's a little harder to do that with forage fiber or with fiber. This is just to point out that the variation in fiber digestibility can have a huge impact in dairy productivity. Okay, so this is an area of a lot of work that we've gone into. This is the difference between poor digestion, less than 40% fiber, and then excellent digestion, which is over 50% of the fiber. Hard to see that difference. Then you just take, you just throw the residue out and put the strainer in the kitchen sink. Yeah. But a 2 to 3 unit change in fiber digestibility is enough energy to produce an additional pound of milk a day. Okay? That can be important. Very quickly, the difference between alfalfa and grass. Grass has been marginalized because we've only looked at one number historically, NDF, neutral detergent fiber, basically the cell wall and contents that aren't soluble. And yes, the oversimplification was the higher the number, the poorer the quality. And so alfalfa is going to have a lower NDF than grass is going to have. The other differences, you come down and you see that alfalfa tends to have a higher non-fiber carbohydrate level. That can be a problem in balancing rations. It's going to also be less digestible fiber than grass. Now there's a range. You can have grass that's as poor digestion as alfalfa. But in general, if you're doing a good job, then the fiber that you're getting from grass is more digestible than the fiber you're getting from alfalfa. So here's what's happened. We as agronomists put a lot of effort in driving that alfalfa NDF and ADF down. We can do that. We can select for traits, and then as agronomists we can go out and figure out cutting management, and we can figure out how to harvest it and get it stored in a timely fashion. So we're driving those fiber numbers down. What we weren't paying any attention to was the digestibility of that fiber. So we didn't improve that. So what we ended up doing was reducing the amount of digestible fiber we were getting from alfalfa. And now we have dairy cows, many herds, where it's corn silage, alfalfa haylage, and grain, and they're not getting enough digestible fiber in their ration. And grass is a good way to get past all that. There's lots of good agronomic reasons for doing it. This is just to show. We go to Rock River Laboratories for 1 year, 2012. We queried the database. We said, please show us all the samples you've got in your database for Green Spirit. That's our Italian ryegrass blend. Okay? The range in NDF for those was 46 to 56% NDF. Then we said, right, okay, all other grass forage samples, of which there is substantially more, with the same NDF range, 46 to 56. Total track neutral detergent fiber digestibility, relatively new assay out of Dr. Combs' work at the University of Wisconsin. What you can see is an 11-point difference in the digestibility of the fiber at similar we look at is NDF, we're not getting the right picture. Now before, I had said 1 to 2 unit change in digestibility was equal to what? Pound of milk. So this is 11 points, rounded to 12, 6 pounds of milk, rounded down to 10, 5 pounds of milk. It's total ration, right? It's the total ration fiber digestibility, but this could be a very valuable component to a ration, right? Also, it can be very good for finishing beef.
Where were the arrows?
That's a good question. Just to give you an example of the range that we can see in perennial grasses, there's a difference in species. Unfortunately, we've tended to use the wrong species and we've tended to use the wrong varietals. So one of the reasons people marginalize alfalfa grass mixtures is they try to use Potomac orchardgrass in their alfalfa. Potomac orchardgrass is a very early maturing variety, so it heads out before the alfalfa's ready. What do you think you're going to cut for, the orchardgrass or the alfalfa? Alfalfa. So now you got fully headed orchardgrass in the alfalfa, of course it's going to lower the feedback. You recognize these two gentlemen? Exactly right. Two mentors. They've probably seen more tall fescue than I ever will. They've been everywhere. But you know, they come visit the research station out in Albany, and all of a sudden they're seeing a tall fescue that'll throw a 10-inch rhizome in a year. It's a turf grass. Does tall fescue have rhizomes? Really shrunk. This one. Wow. So we're looking at stuff. This is what happens when you go around the world looking for new plant collections from the place of origin. You find all kinds of genetic diversity that you can just make selections from. You don't have to do anything weird. But you can come up with a soft leaf fescue versus a coarse leaf fescue. Kentucky 31 is the coarse leaf type fescue. And animals routinely will tell you that there's a difference, given a preference. And yet, despite grazing with this kind of intensity, we have similar persistence to Kentucky 31 and Endophytic out of a soft leaf tall fescue with a beneficial end. Just to show you again, here's some differences in digestibility. Again, TTNDFD, and the green triangles represent NDF, and you can see that cut to cut, there's, this is like SPF 43, which is one of our products. This is an old horse type fescue that we carry, and then quad tall fescue. So first cuttings, first, third, and fifth bar, and you can see the difference. And then the difference between cuts for each one. Genetic differences, we can select these. And if you can achieve that, you can find yourself producing more digestible fiber, which means what? More energy, more pounds, more milk. Sorry, this is just more of the same kind of idea. This time there's 3 cuts. So here's STF 43. The brown bar is the total cell content, cell walls, and then you have the digestibility in the green bar. And if you just look between fawn, first cutting, STF 43, first cutting, second cutting, third cutting, third cutting. The really exciting one is when you come down here and you start looking at this pair of data, and that's including a new species, a species called meadow fescue, which is a relative of tall fescue. But it's got much higher fiber digestibility than tall fescue. And I'll show some attributes of that here in just a little bit. So perennial ryegrass, if you can grow perennial ryegrass, grow it. It's, the king of forages, the queen of forages, I forget what. Alfalfa is one, and then perennial ryegrass is the other. Perennial ryegrass is the basis of European dairy industry, ruminant industry. It's the basis of the New Zealand grass economy. Unfortunately, those varieties that came in weren't well suited. And we've done some selection out of material from Romania, where again, it originates or has been there long enough to now see localized varieties. And then we've also introduced a beneficial endophyte into perennial ryegrass, and we'll get to that in a second. But now we have a perennial ryegrass that the New Zealand dairy farmers in southwestern Missouri are using. Now, according to every textbook I know, that's well outside of the area of adaptation of perennial ryegrass. I would think that this would be something of interest to places like this. Orchardgrass has a place, but that's not on waterlogged sites. Again, we want to look for maybe some later heading varieties, and then we've also selected for more leaf than the older varieties. And where does your digestible dry matter reside? In the leaves. Is everyone clear on the difference between Italian ryegrass and annual ryegrass? Okay, this is the universally recognized gesture of disagreement. So Italian ryegrass is like winter wheat. If I plant winter wheat in springtime, what kind of grain yield do I get? Not much. It has to be fertilized, right? It has to go through that cold period to initiate reproductive growth. Italian ryegrass is exactly the same thing. So if you are in a climate, if you are on a site where you can get Italian ryegrass into the ground in the spring, you've essentially got vegetative annual ryegrass growing all that year. And if it overwinters and comes out in the winter, then it's going to, yes, make a seed head, but its flowering tends to be later than annual ryegrass. And then you get better regrowth. Many people will plant Italian ryegrass mixed with a small grain, so a triticale grain spirit mix is one that's used quite a bit in this part of the world. Unfortunately, there's a great deal of confusion, and unfortunately some of our institutions contribute to this. I couldn't help myself. Annual ryegrass, also known as Italian ryegrass, is a turf grass. Strike through. It's not a turf grass. It's not the same as annual ryegrass, right? So here's a Italian ryegrass. This is a Westerwolf annual ryegrass, what typically is an annual ryegrass, following spring seeding. Okay, you plant annual ryegrass in the spring, you're going to get a seed head. Not with Italian ryegrass. This is a competing product that's labeled as Italian ryegrass. So, copy it off from the board. This is just an example that we did. It's very difficult in the Willamette Valley to produce Italian ryegrass because if it's ground that would produce Italian ryegrass seed, it's been producing annual ryegrass seed for a period of time, so you've got contamination in the seed bank, in the soil. So this example, this is just straight Italian ryegrass. This is just straight Westerwolf annual ryegrass. Okay? And you can see, I hope, just how much seed head formation there is here, and there's none here. And then, it doesn't take much until it begins to look as if it's 100%. And so, we've set a low tolerance for the contamination, and we had to help Oregon State University Seed Testing Lab develop testing because the American industry doesn't recognize the difference between Italian and annual. So this is something that we brought in and introduced into the market. High biomass productivity in a short period of time. Better forage quality than annual ryegrass, unlike winter cereals, you're going to get better regrowth. One good place that it works is when you realize you've got stand loss in alfalfa, you can just drill this right in or scratch it in. It's only the ryegrass essentially in how it performs. You can throw that on the carpet, give it some water, and it's sprout. Excellent for finishing grass-fed feed. Tall fescue, I probably don't need to tell you much about tall fescue, except that most of what we know is a coarse type, and there are softleaf varieties. This is one of our real strengths. I remember there was a picture I meant to put in, darn it. I've got pictures of the margins of the leaves of a coarse type and our softleaf type, and the coarse type looks like a saw with the edges, and the softleaf has none of that. Again, genetic traits. But this is softleaf fescue, and then that's the coarse type upright fescue. But there's no difference in terms of its ability to stockpile. It does just as well. It's just a more digestible, more palatable plant. Which I've said here. Everybody's clear on the endophyte, right? No? Okay. So, this is a really good idea that nature has. They're developed over eons a symbiotic, that is mutually beneficial relationship between specific fungi and host plants. Because the host plant gets disease resistance, drought tolerance, insect resistance, the fungi actually produces, in some cases, a substance that harms animal performance. And so Kentucky 31, which was initially selected from a hillside in 1931 because it was this vigorous plant growing where everything else was struggling, that plant was infected. And this fungi can only be spread through infected seed. And the only way a seed can be infected is if it was produced from a maternal plant that was itself infected. Doesn't go by pollen. There's no spores or infection between an uninfected plant and an infected plant. Okay? So all of the Kentucky 31 then that planted was infected to one degree or another. Over however many years it took to plant several million acres to one variety. And that's how we have all of the toxic Kentucky 31 spread across the whole transition zone of the United States. Well, just as there are different strains of grasses, there are different strains of these fungi. And they've been collected, they've been identified, they've been characterized in terms of their alkaloid profile. And we now have endophytes that give the plant all the benefits without producing animal disorders. They have endophyte. It's a beneficial or novel endophyte, or terms that you'll hear. Non-toxic would be like. And so what you're seeing here is these little strands, or that hyphae of the mycelia, of the fungi, growing in the interstitial spaces, in between the cellular spaces, or the cells, of the grass plant. Yes. So all of these are benefits of having an endophyte. And when I was just as a graduate student in the early, 83 to 86 time frame, the big thing was, okay, now we figured out the fescue toxicosis, now we need to go to non-endophyte-free varieties. That seemed reasonable. So lots of endophyte-free varieties of Kentucky 30 of tall fescue got released. And then we learned, no, we actually need some endophyte in there to enable the plant to survive. So New Zealand had its own experience. They had a different endophyte in their perennial ryegrass. They had an insect that if they didn't have the endophyte, the insect would take out the entire stand of grass. is similar to tall fescue, but its digestibility is significantly better than tall fescue. It can tolerate both wet and dry soils, tolerates moderate grazing pressure, outperforms perennial ryegrass in drier weather, very cold tolerant, and can have high yield in dry. This would be a plant that would be worth looking at. Meadow fescue. Yes. Now, I would suggest that you have it as a mix with tall fescue, rather than a straight standard meadow fescue. New perennial ryegrass varieties are available. They're worth taking a look at. You want orchardgrass varieties that are late in heading and have a high leaf to stem ratio. True Italian ryegrass can be a valuable part of your operation. Meadow fescue is an excellent opportunity for increased weight gains and milk performance, milk production. We've got the base grass taken care of now, right? Now we need legumes. Why do we want legumes?
Well, meadow fescue and perennial ryegrass work together.
You could probably come up with a mix that would do it. I'd be a little concerned about too much perennial ryegrass in the mix, overcoming the slightly, the slower developing meadow fescue. Why do we want legumes in a mix? Nitrogen fixation is one thing. Okay, crude protein, I heard. You should put the crude in front of protein, but that's for maybe tomorrow's lecture. But biological nitrogen fixation is another, feed quality is another. The dry matter from clover is more digestible than the dry matter from clover. We now have white clovers that will go from Texas up through Canada. Not the same variety, different varieties. Okay, very aggressive, produce lots of stolons. So lots of new white clovers to look at, and it's somewhat amusing to be standing with somebody in their pasture that's mostly thistle rosettes, right? Because we're in that early part of the season, and they're saying, well, what can I do about the clover? About the thistles. And as soon as you start mentioning herbicides as a possible treatment, they go, well, but what about my clover? And you start looking hard for clover. Oh, you mean that small little egotype that has leaves about that big around that never gets high enough for your cow to get its pump around? Yeah, okay, not much worried about that. Your thistles are what's killing you right now. We can take care of the clovers later. Red clover is a really, really interesting plant. Now, if you're in a haymaking operation, I probably am not going to put much white clover in the mix. Really hard to get white clover dried down. If you're making baleage or high moisture hay or something like that, okay. But still, white clover for hay, more pasture. Red clover would be a better choice for hay as far as I can tell. In a dairy situation, it can work, but maybe the rotations can be a little too fast for red clover. So it's kind of a plant that has a niche. It's interesting because the new work that's going on in alfalfa improvement is in two fronts. It's fiber digestibility and it's in protein profile. And in both cases, it involves leveraging the red clover plant. In other words, the fiber in red clover, first of all, there's more of it, and second of all, it's more digestible than alfalfa. And number two, the protein profile in red clover has more protein that will escape the rumen and enter into the gastric digestive system. And my question is, why not grow red clover? Instead of trying to make alfalfa, why don't we just, so I would suggest alfalfa is always going to have a place. I think it's been oversold. I think it's on acres that it doesn't need to be on. Red clover fits that niche very well. Red clover is cheaper than alfalfa. You can follow red clover with red clover, which you can't do with alfalfa, right? You can't plant alfalfa into alfalfa, but you can do that with red clover. Here's the other thing. There's some work coming out of the pasture research lab at University of Kentucky. that suggests that there are secondary metabolites within red clover that actually act as an antidote to the ergovaline toxin in the Kentucky 31. So where Kentucky 31 ergovaline acts as a vasoconstrictor, we have naturally occurring compounds in the red clover that act as a vasodilator. And so for years we talked about, dilution is the solution to overcoming fescue toxicosis. Well, maybe, but maybe it also has this actual antidote as well. So we have a line of red clovers that goes from Florida up through Canada. And some interesting varieties to take a look at. Brassicas. There's a whole lot of effort now. Different states have different programs. I'm not familiar with West Virginia, I'm sorry. But for example, in Arkansas, 300 Days of Grazing is one of their extension efforts. I once heard that from Mississippi to Minnesota, the average cow-calf operation feeds hay 5 months out of the year. I mean, that's a great statistic. I have no idea how to verify that. But I have no doubt that people are feeding more hay than they need to in the regions that they're located in. I'm not saying you can get away from ever having, making, or feeding hay. But I have a hard time understanding why you're feeding hay 5 months in Mississippi. That one just escapes me. Okay? And so brassicas are a really good forage crop. It can fit in all kinds of niches. Like if you're renovating pastures, you can come in and establish this either on the fields you're renovating or on other fields to boost your feed productivity to make up for the deficit that you're creating by taking that old pasture out to reseed it. These kinds of flexing that we have to do within our system. This is one quote. It costs him 3 cents a pound to produce hay, and then he has to haul and feed it. The brassicas cost him a cent to plant and catalog. So any feed that you can have for your animals to graze is always going to be cheaper than what comes on a truck, right? 8 more minutes, okay. Now we're outside of brassicas, we're outside of legumes. These are 2 interesting new species, chicory and plantain. Anybody heard of these? Yeah. And the problem for us is a lot of seed laws get in the way of us selling improved varieties of these. But these are plants that are being used in New Zealand in their dairy industry and other industries, and they have some interesting properties. This is a stand in northwestern Oregon, so this is up Tillamook, up by the ocean. And this is a ryegrass, chicory, and plantain stand. And what they're finding on some of the ryegrass clover pastures in New Zealand is the presence of plantain actually results in reduced nitrogen deposition by the grazing animals. There's compounds within that plant that affect the nitrogen metabolism within the ruminant. And so they're beginning to face problems with water quality issues there like we all are here. And things like that become interesting. But the other thing is that it just produces a lot of feed in the summertime, has deep roots, will bring nutrients up to the surface that ryegrass might miss, produces better in the summer than ryegrass. Very high quality feed, can finish animals very easily. Just to show you very quickly, I'll just get to this one at the end and open it up for questions. The World Dairy Expo is sort of like, anybody here been to it? It's a huge show, lots of, well, I'll tell you, I got to be on the Lincoln University Dairy Farm in New Zealand, and a week later I was at the World Dairy Expo. The difference between the New Zealand dairy industry and the Wisconsin dairy industry was huge. But they have this forage quality competition. And by putting grass with alfalfa, we took the world champion. grass, we have to kind of get rid of it. So there's interesting things coming, but if I told you, I'd have to kill you. We've got some very interesting developments coming. I really wish I could tell you. But at that point, I think I've gone on way too long. So thank you. I've got 5 minutes. Okay, good. Thank you. Do you? Okay. One in the back and then up here.
You kind of already established your manifesto when we start talking about establishment. You say it was a little slower to establish.
Then perennial ryegrass.
Okay. How will it establish new seedings along with the VAR Optimum plus E34?
It will. The VAR Optimum, one of its selection criteria was for rapid seed establishment. So it's going to come a little faster than the meadow fescue, but they're very similar. I don't worry about making that kind of a seed. The perennial ryegrass is just so much earlier, so much more aggressive, that's what worries me about trying to make a seeding of that if I have too much perennial ryegrass in it.
Yeah, going into mild grazing and get a couple paddocks of wearing cattle on, just optimize what can I sow out there and let the cattle handle in just before I put it back into the ground.
Okay, all right. So the question was, I'm sorry, I should have repeated your question. The question was, you've got some paddocks that are essentially being sacrificed at this point, and they're torn up. What could we see to have tramped in before rotating them out? My next question is, are you going to do this to them again next year?
Right.
Okay. So one thing you can think about is something like an annual ryegrass. It's going to be quick to come, it's going to be relatively inexpensive, so you lose it, doesn't much matter, you'll get a lot of productivity off of it. You could throw some clover into that if you wish, but I suspect that there's probably a lot of material in the soil that you're breaking up that sod and giving it space to come. So I'd probably be looking something like that annual, which would be a temporary fix. You could go with a small grain too, for that matter, but the annual ryegrass.
What about brassicas in the spring?
Well, yeah, certainly. So the question about adding brassica into that mix, and at that point, then the question is, are you going to graze it once or twice? Because so a turnip, I know people will graze turnips multiple times, but strictly speaking, a turnip is a single graze crop. And then things like rape or a hybrid brassica are meant to be multiple graze crops. And so one of those could fit in there as well. And with the annual ryegrass works well, because then you have grass dry matter in with the brassica.
I was in a meeting one time and they had an individual speaking on Fescue. And they made the comment, they were supposed to be educated, so I'm going to ask you if this is comment true. They said if you take Kentucky 31, which is Endophytic infection, and let that seed set in the building for a year, that the endophyte will not be in that plant when you grow it. Is there any truth to that?
So you're assuming I'm educated.
Well,
The check cleared. You know what I'm saying? So the question was about a comment that said if you take Kentucky 31 endophyte infected seed and you store it for a period of time, that the endophyte dies.
That's what they said.
And that is true. The viability period for the endophyte in seed is less than the viability period for the seed itself. Storage conditions are going to vary, right? So therefore that time is going to vary. But yes, absolutely. The trick then is that there are tests that are used to determine the presence of endophyte that will still show positive because the fungal body is still there to react with the reagent. So it'll say, yeah, it's still endophyte infected. The question then is it viable? And for that you need a different test, so you just need to make sure of that. But the problem then is you've got Kentucky 37 without endophite. So you've got a coarse type, lower digestibility that won't survive. But no, they were not flying.
I didn't know that.
All right. Thank you. I think I got an evaluation report for just about everybody. This is your grandfather's grasses on the title, or beyond grandfather's grasses. Dr. Peter Ballerstedt is the presenter. Please fill out the form, and there's a very tiny little line that says other down there. If you really want to write something, you can use the back of the form. Good sign. When you're all done, if you could please drop the forms by the table on the way out the door, I would be most appreciative. And in token of our appreciation, Dr. Ballerstedt, we're going to, in case you don't have any friends around, we've got some if you could get some croissants and some dinner rolls, and you can, there you go. There you go. Thank you.